Hello and welcome to my video. Today I will be doing a Matt Reeves director review in preparation for the release of The Batman. I will be covering a total of 5 films, but only 4 of them will be from Matt Reeves. I'll tell you why when we get there. Let's get it started right away with Cloverfield. As a group of New Yorkers enjoy a going away party, little do they know that they will soon face the most terrifying night of their lives. A creature the size of a skyscraper descends upon the city, leaving death and destruction in its wake. Using a handheld video camera, the friends record their struggle to survive as New York City crumbles around them. Cloverfield is available for rent or purchase in Canada or on HBO Max in the United States. This was my first found footage film experience. I had a very tough time watching it because the VR or first-person video game feel to the cinematography caused me to experience motion sickness in my stomach and my head. And a lot of the audience also experienced this same feeling when they saw it in theaters. I also generally didn't like the characters and found that they made incredibly dumb decisions, even if you could see some people making those same decisions in real life. And they also somehow survived things that I don't think would be possible. The actors were also doing a terrible job, but how can they do well with poor writing? I wasn't ever really scared for what I thought was supposed to be a horror film. The effects were reasonably okay, and I think the premise was interesting, but the overall product was lacking. Now let's move on to the second film I'll be covering, Let Me In. Bullied at school, neglected at home, and incredibly lonely, 12-year-old Owen spends his day plotting revenge on his tormentors and spends his nights spying on the other residents of the apartment complex. His sole friend is Abby, a strange girl who comes out only at nighttime. Both outcasts, the two form a strong bond. When Abby's caretaker disappears amid a series of gruesome murders, Owen begins to suspect that she is hiding a terrible secret. Let Me In is streaming on Plex in Canada and on Netflix in the US. This was quite a beautiful movie. I enjoyed the story and thought the chemistry between Cody Smith-McPhee and Chloe Grace Moretz was excellent. Cody Smith-McPhee is playing an awkward kid in this film, like he does play in The Power of the Dog, and Chloe Grace Moretz is great, as she always is in her films. This felt like an unintentional horror comedy with just how awkward these two characters were around each other. This movie also has a beautiful and sometimes terror-inducing score by Michael Giacchino. One complaint I had is that the story starts halfway through and then jumps back 2 weeks before telling its story. I always find a problem when films do this, especially with this one that let me in, wink wink, on too much of where the story was going. I also thought that the vampire movement effects looked quite goofy and took me out of the movie. A choice that I was okay with, but others may have a problem with, is that everyone is speaking their dialogue in whispers or just above. Overall, I thought this was a great horror/romance film, although I haven't seen the original, which might be even better. Now let's take a detour from Matt Reeves's films and pivot to a film directed by Rupert Wyatt. This film is going to be Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Will Rodman, a scientist in San Francisco, is experimenting with a drug that he hopes will cure his father's Alzheimer's disease. After his work is deemed a failure, Will becomes the guardian of Caesar, an infant chimp who is exposed in utero to Will's drug. Caesar displays unusual intelligence, and Will decides to continue his experiments secretly. But as Caesar's intellect and abilities grow, he comes to represent a threat to man's dominion over Earth. Rise of the Planet of the Apes is streaming on Disney Plus in Canada and on FX Now, DirecTV, and Spectrum in the US. I want to be completely honest. While I'm mostly focused on first-time watches for this channel, I have seen this movie before when it was in theaters a decade ago. I rewatched it for this review for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I forgot a lot of what happens in this movie, although I did remember the ending, and I needed to know what happens in the sequels, just so that I am not coming in completely blind. The other reason I chose to rewatch this is that I didn't enjoy it when I first saw it, likely because I hadn't seen anything related to Planet of the Apes and was uninterested in it. With that out of the way, let's move on to my review. I want to say that I thought many moments in this film were just a rehash of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, just with a larger budget. The ape special effects looked like a video game cutscene, especially when the apes were moving or in close-up shots. Although I can forgive the filmmakers somewhat, since this was one of the first films to use motion capture on location rather than in a special studio. Any differences between this movie and Conquest are likely because the original script was for an unrelated project. The dialogue felt like any other blockbuster film from the early 2010s. The one scene that annoyed me the most was Dodge Landon versus Caesar. Tom Felton's character, Dodge Landon, really didn't know how to use a stun baton, let alone understand that electricity and water don't mix well together, which leads to his death. I will say that this had a more realistic scenario for ape uprising than the original series. Instead of a plague killing all dogs and cats, leading to ape pets and then slaves, apes rising up against animal testing and cruelty. My biggest complaint is with the Contagion epilogue and storyline, which I felt was the weakest part both times I've seen the movie. Although I understand what they were trying to set up for sequels. Overall, I like it more than I did when I saw it in theaters, likely because I now have a background knowledge of the original Planet of the Apes films. Now, I want to talk about some of the references I noticed in this film. So the first reference is Bright Eyes, who is Caesar's mom in the film, which is a reference to Taylor, who was called Bright Eyes by Dr. Zira in the original film. Another reference I noticed was an ape being treated like a pet, which happened sometime before Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which more dealt with ape slavery. The third reference I noticed was the line, "Take your paws off me, you damn dirty ape." This is something that happened in both the original, the remake in 2001, and in this film. Cornelia, the fourth reference that I noticed was Cornelia, which is close to Cornelius, is likely a nod to Caesar's original name in Conquest, although later in the franchise, we'll see another Cornelius. The fifth and final reference that I noticed on my own was Dodge Landon. Tom Felton's character is a reference to both Thomas Dodge and John Landon, who were the two other survivors of the Icarus from the original film. And Dodge Landon's father in this film is also named John Landon. There are plenty more references that you could find if you check out the IMDb trivia section for this film. Now let's move on back to a Matt Reeves directed film, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. 10 years after the simian flu wiped out much of the world's Homo sapiens, genetically enhanced chimpanzee Caesar and his ever-growing band of followers have established a thriving colony just outside San Francisco in Muir Woods. Meanwhile, a small band of human survivors emerges, which forces Caesar as leader to grapple with the dual challenges of protecting his people and reestablishing a relationship with the remaining human population, the latter being Caesar's secret wish. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is streaming on Disney Plus in Canada and on DirecTV and Spectrum in the US. This movie's story, like the previous film, is in many ways like an improved version of Battle for the Planet of the Apes. This film was excellent at developing its characters and utilizing its tense and emotional moments well. Compared to Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the ape visual effects have slightly improved, but the other animals, deer and bear in the opening scene, still looked unrealistic. Even still, I felt as though Koba and Caesar's fight in the dam looked goofy, again because of the special effects not being all there. Other than that, there were great action shots, especially during the ape siege on the human city and in the end fight between Koba and Caesar. I think the character of Koba was a great stand-in for General Aldo, since his character has much more depth as to why he hates humans and was a much better spy because of his acting talents. The movie falters with the one-dimensional human characters and their contribution to the plot, minimal as it was. Now let's move on to the final film I'll be covering for this review, War for the Planet of the Apes. Caesar and his apes are forced into a deadly conflict with an army of humans led by a ruthless colonel. After the apes suffer unimaginable losses, Caesar wrestles with his darker instincts and begins his own mythic quest to avenge his kind. As the journey finally brings them face to face, Caesar and the colonel are pitted against each other in an epic battle that will determine the fate of both of their species and the future of the planet. War for the Planet of the Apes is streaming on Disney Plus in Canada, as with the rest of the Planet of the Apes films, and on FX Now, DirecTV, and Spectrum in the US. This was my favorite of all the Planet of the Apes films. I loved the Ape Brotherhood of Apes, Rocket, Luca, and Maurice, led by Caesar. One of my favorite characters in the movie had to be Bad Ape for his comedic moments and a couple more emotional ones. All the main characters in this movie were well written and fleshed out with their own motivations and flaws, including the human characters, especially the colonel. The cinematography was stunning and often left me in awe. The ape effects were at their best in this film, although a couple of scenes still looked fake and needed a bit more work. In addition to the ape VFX not always working out, there was an action scene with arrows that looked atrocious. One thing I noticed at the end of the film is that Caesar was written in some ways like a mashup between Jesus and Moses. Moses because he helps the people escape slavery and is not able to enjoy the promised land that he's led them to, and Jesus because he was briefly crucified and pierced in his side. So I'm going to talk about some of the references I noticed in this film. So the first thing I want to mention is the X-shaped crosses, which marked danger in the original film. And this film, it does the same way. Another reference that I noticed is mute humans, although probably would have happened at some point because it's part of the franchise. The third thing I noticed was Alpha and Omega as part of the humans camp, because that is a reference to Beneath the Planet of the Apes. They also reference Apocalypse Now with the words Ape Apocalypse Now scrolled in the cave tunnel underneath the ape prison. The final reference I noticed was Nova. I didn't really like this reference while watching the movie, but I found out on IMDb that they actually used archived dialogue from Charlton Heston from the original film when Maurice gives her the name Nova. Someone also pointed out that Bad Ape gives her this plate while warning Caesar not to go to the human zoo. Nova sounds like Nova, which in Spanish means not going. So a little cheeky reference there. Now let's move on to the ranking of the Matt Reeves specific films from this video. At number 4, we have Cloverfield at 1 out of 5. At number 3, we have Let Me In at 3.5 out of 5. At number 2 is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes at 4 out of 5. And at number 1 is War for the Planet of the Apes at 4.5 out of 5. The average rating for Matt Reeves films pre-Batman is a 3.25 out of 5. Now, I did skip one of his films, The Pallbearer. That's because on IMDb, the average rating was 5.1. I may end up checking that out because I assume it would probably be better, in my opinion, than Cloverfield. I also want to give you an update on my Planet of the Apes franchise ranking. Looking at the films that I've seen, I would now put at number 5, Rise of the Planet of the Apes. At number 4, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. These two were really difficult because I almost could put them on the same level. At number 3, we have Planet of the Apes 1968. And at number 2, we have Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And again, as I said, at number 1 is War for the Planet of the Apes. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any suggestions or information you'd like to share, please leave a comment down below. And if you want to see more from me, hit the subscribe button. I will be probably coming out with another video really soon. I'll be doing probably a Batman review. I'm probably going to see it on release day in IMAX. So I will probably come out with a review for that really soon. Thank you again for watching and have a great day.